In just a few hours, President Biden will deliver a major voting rights speech as more Republican-led states introduce tough new restrictions nationwide. He's expected to make a federal push to protect election laws after facing criticism from some progressives and activists. They accuse him of failing to prioritize this issue on the same level as other top agenda items like COVID relief and infrastructure. And this comes after Texas state Democrats fled the state as GOP lawmakers tried to pass new voting restrictions. Now Texas Governor Greg Abbott is threatening arrests. Ed O'Keefe takes a closer look.
We shall overcome.
More than 50 Texas House Democrats arrived in the Washington area last night aboard a pair of private jets after fleeing a special session of the Texas legislature called to address about a dozen issues, including changes to state elections laws.
There is nothing special about this special session. This is a suppression session. We're not going to put up with that. Right. Democracy is on the line. The eyes of the nation are on Texas.
Texas Democrats killed a similar Republican-backed elections bill in May by walking out in the closing minutes of the regular session. So Governor Greg Abbott and Republicans are trying again. Their proposals would eliminate drive-through and 24-hour early voting used for the first time last year in the predominantly Democratic Houston area. They would also expand early voting hours to some medium-sized counties, add ID requirements for voting by mail, and give more powers to partisan poll watchers. Last night, Abbott called the Democrats quitters.
It's like during a football game or a baseball game, taking their equipment when they're way behind and just leaving the field. That is not the way that Texans do things.
And he said they will face legal consequences.
Once they step back into the state of Texas, they will be arrested and brought to the Texas Capitol, and we will be conducting business.
To constituents who elected you to do a job and to be in Austin and debate these issues, and they see you leaving the state today and may think they're running away from their responsibilities.
Nothing could be further from the truth. We're not going to sit in Austin, in the House chamber, and watch the Republican majority steamroll the voting rights of our constituents. We're fighting back. We're leaving, so they can't do that.
How long will you be here in Washington?
Well, our intention is to be out of Texas until this session is over.
And if he calls another one right away?
That's our message to Congress. We need them to act now because they will keep calling these sessions to pass voter suppression legislation.
Well, Ed O'Keefe is with us now, joining us from the White House. Wow, Ed, I think this is like a page out of the Wisconsin Democrats did something similar where they fled to avoid a vote. That was a while ago, but I was shocked when I saw them on a plane. Republicans hold the majority in both chambers of the Texas state legislature. They argue that Democrats can't delay the voting process forever. You spoke to one of those lawmakers last night, and I want to play a little bit of that interview.
If they silence the voices of voters in Texas, Republicans will march all across this country until there is no more democracy. The biggest way we can impact that is to get federal voting rights legislation, and we are on the brink. And we are bringing our voices and we are bringing our fight to Washington. We hope the Senate will hear us, and we hope they will act.
So what's the long-term plan? I mean, they obviously can't just not return to Texas. So what's the next step for them?
Well, they're staying at a hotel about 5 blocks north of here at the White House in downtown Washington. They're scheduled to be at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, this morning to meet with lawmakers to try to put pressure on Democrats and Republicans to take up voting rights legislation again in the Senate. Remember, there was a vote on it last month. Republicans blocked it by using a filibuster. Democrats say they're going to try to bring it up again. There is a bipartisan group trying to talk through this issue, trying to see if there's some kind of way to pass something that reinforces or bolsters voting rights across the country. Remember the long simmering debate? We've talked about it plenty here on CBSN over the last several months. Here in Washington, Democrats believe they've got to establish federal standards for absentee balloting, for ID, for early voting, and other steps. Republicans say that's an overreach, and there are some moderate Democrats in the Senate who are also concerned about this potentially going too far. So that debate will continue. What's notable is these Texas Democrats say they'd like to see this passed by the beginning of the August recess, the congressional August recess, whenever that may be, because there's already talk of it being blown up entirely, so that Congress can stay and focus on issue number one, or what has been issue number one for them over the last several months, infrastructure spending. Remember, there's conversations about that underway. Debate on that is supposed to begin in the Senate next week. So what will these Texas Democrats do? They're going to stay here in Washington, they say, through the end of that current special session. But if the governor calls another one, they'll stick around. And that's their point, is the sooner Congress acts to essentially invalidate what Republicans in Texas are trying to do, the sooner they can go home. A lot of people are going to, around here in Washington, are going to say, you guys are going to be here a while, because this is just something that's not going to get done. And to your point about legislators who leave their state, Oregon Republicans did it a few years ago regarding some climate change legislation. And yes, Wisconsin Democrats did it a few years ago. Texas Democrats did it back in 2003 when the state was debating redrawing their congressional and legislative districts. They went up to Oklahoma. This time, they came to Virginia, a Democratic-controlled state, landed in a Democratic-controlled county, and drove into a Democratic-controlled city. That is by design. They didn't want to enter a jurisdiction where either a Republican mayor or county executive or governor could potentially heed the calls of the Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott and try to round him up and send him back to Texas.
And they also did not fly coach. They flew on a private jet. And, you know, some people were asking questions about them on the jet. They weren't wearing masks and all that sort of stuff. You actually asked one of the lawmakers about that when they landed in Washington. Here's the response that you got.
There's been a lot of, as you can imagine, Twitter and other reaction saying, oh, look, they're flying private when they're allegedly concerned about the people back home, but why are they flying private jets to Washington when they could take commercial? Why aren't they wearing masks on the plane? You say?
Well, I mean, and I reject that argument as far as like the mask mandate. When our Republican colleagues want to call us out on it, they were the ones that wanted to lift the mask mandate in the first place, and they're the ones that pushed it, and they were the ones that were not abiding by the rules when there was a mask mandate in the House. We're all fully vaccinated, and so we're following CDC guidelines.
No response to the private plane question. Why didn't they fly commercial? Where did this private plane come from? Who paid for it?
It's not entirely clear who did. My understanding is it was essentially a collection of Democrats. Whether they were Texas Democrats, whether they were out-of-state Democrats, that's unclear. The DNC, for example, didn't respond to our inquiries after we'd heard that perhaps the Democratic National Committee helped pay for those flights. You know, there are a number of Texas legislators who have enough money to, you know, pay for a private plane to get them here. Be curious to see how they get back to Texas and who ends up paying for their hotel bills here. We know that some of these Texas Democrats were fundraising off of this, other groups fundraising on their behalf to try to raise money to keep them here in town and to raise awareness about this. Given the lull right now in sort of legislative and political discourse outside of what the president may be doing, this is likely to earn some airtime this week, draw some attention from the 49 other states, and that is partly why they're doing this. Yes, they say it's to tell Congress to do this, but look, they're playing politics just as much as Republicans are back in Texas, and we'll see how this ultimately pans out.
So Vice President Kamala Harris also spoke about what these lawmakers did, fleeing the state. Here's what she had to say.
I applaud them standing for the rights of all Americans and all Texans to express their voice through their vote unencumbered. I do believe that fighting for the right to vote is as American as apple pie. It is so fundamental to fighting for the principles of our democracy.
So, Ed, President Biden's going to be delivering a speech focusing on voting rights. Do we know what the focus of that speech will be, whether or not he'll bring up this move by the Texas Democrats at all?
Well, aides tell us, Anne Marie, that he's been working on this speech since at least late last week. Drafts of it have been circulating ever since then. This is designed essentially to amplify things that he's talked about in passing, you know, in between those meetings he holds or he gets asked about it in a press conference. He wanted to do it in one big organized way. Going to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, the birthplace, of course, of American democracy, not entirely, or yes, that is on purpose, let's put it that way. And he will try to, again, amplify his concerns about this, make the argument, a moral argument, that trying to suppress one's right to vote is a form of suppression. It is likely he will explicitly call out what is underway in Texas. And, you know, not to suggest there was coordination between what the White House and Texas Democrats are doing. That is not true. But, you know, he will acknowledge what's up in Texas and what has already happened this year in places like Iowa, Georgia, Arizona, Florida, and other Republican-controlled areas that are enacting these changes in response to what happened during the pandemic, changes that were made in some of these states, but also driven by the Republican concerns, the unfounded ones, that the election was stolen.
Well, we'll see if it's enough to, if his critics, some of them within his own party, but as president, there are limitations to what he can do, with the exception of maybe using the Justice Department like he is with the lawsuit in Georgia. Ed, thank you very much.
Take care.